I am Jasmine Bennett, 32 years old, and I thought I had seen the worst of humanity while hunting cybercriminals in the favelas of Brazil. I was wrong. The true darkness was waiting for me in the suburbs of Atlanta inside the home I grew up in. I flew back to surprise my mother holding a silk scarf she had always wanted. Instead, I found a digital lock on her front door and strangers drinking champagne in her living room. But the real horror wasn't the party. It was the video I found later. A video of my own brother Dante laughing while he poured ice water on our sleeping mother just to get likes on the internet. He thought he was untouchable because he had power of attorney. He thought he had buried me. What he did not know is that I do not just fix computers. I destroy lives that deserve to be destroyed. By the time I am done with him, the entire country will be watching his downfall, and there will be no place left for him to hide. Before I tell you how I dismantled his life piece by piece, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for someone who could not fight for themselves. The flight from Rio de Janeiro to Hartsfield-Jackson Airport felt like it lasted a lifetime. For 3 years, I had been buried in code securing networks for oil conglomerates, making more money in a month than my brother Dante had made in his entire life. But money could not buy peace of mind. For the last 2 weeks, my calls to Mama Lucille had gone straight to voicemail. That was not like her. Mama was the type of woman who answered on the first ring, ready to tell you about the neighbors or what she cooked for Sunday dinner. The silence was deafening, a cold pit in my stomach that no amount of in-flight whiskey could dissolve. It was raining when I landed in Atlanta, a heavy, humid downpour that slicked the streets and blurred the city lights. I did not call ahead. I wanted to see her face light up. I wanted to wrap that hand-painted silk scarf around her shoulders and tell her I was home for good. The Uber pulled up to the curb of our 2-story brick house in Cascade Heights. My heart stopped. The driveway, usually empty except for Mama's old sedan, was occupied by a brand-new matte black Range Rover. The windows were tinted dark, aggressive, out of place. I stepped out into the rain, dragging my suitcase. The house was vibrating. Heavy bass from a trap beat shook the front windows. My mother hated loud music. She said it disturbed the spirit of the home. I walked up the porch steps, my grip tightening on my bag. I reached for my key, the one I had kept on my ring for 3 years, a symbol of where I belonged. It did not fit. The old brass deadbolt was gone, replaced by a sleek black biometric keypad glowing with a red ring. My key scratched uselessly against the plastic. Panic began to rise in my throat, hot and sharp. I pounded on the door. The wood was solid, familiar, but everything else felt wrong. "Open the door!" I shouted, my voice fighting against the thunder and the booming music from inside. It took a full minute before the music lowered slightly. I heard footsteps. Not the slow, shuffling gait of my mother, but the heavy, confident stride of someone who owned the place. The door swung open. It was not Mama. It was Jessica. My sister-in-law stood there holding a half-empty martini glass, her blonde hair messy, her eyes glazed with a mix of alcohol and arrogance. But it was not her face that made my blood freeze. It was what she was wearing. She was wrapped in a floral silk robe, my mother's robe, the one Dad had bought her for their 25th anniversary, the one Mama only wore on Christmas mornings, or when she was feeling particularly elegant. Seeing this woman, this intruder, wearing my mother's second skin, felt like a physical slap. "Well, look who it is," Jessica slurred, leaning against the doorframe, blocking my view of the interior. "The prodigal sister returns from the jungle." "We didn't think you would make it." "Where is my mother?" I asked, my voice trembling with a rage I could barely contain. "Take off her robe. Where is she?" Jessica laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. She took a sip of her drink, unbothered. "Relax, Jazz. You are soaking wet. You look like a drowned rat. Mama isn't here. And this robe? It was just hanging in the closet, gathering dust. Someone has to appreciate nice things." I tried to push past her, but a hand shot out from the shadows of the hallway. It was Dante. My brother stepped into the porch light, and the first thing I saw wasn't his eyes. It was the ring light attached to his phone. He was holding it up, the camera lens pointed directly at my face. "What is up, guys?" Dante boomed, using that fake energetic voice he put on for his followers. "Look what we have here." My little sister Jasmine just showed up uninvited, trying to crash the vibe. Can you believe the audacity? She disappears for 3 years, abandons the family, and now she is banging on my door at midnight. "Put the phone down, Dante," I snapped, shielding my face from the glare. "Where is Mama? Why are the locks changed? Why is she wearing her clothes?" Dante did not lower the phone. He moved closer, zooming in on my wet hair, my shaking hands. He was performing. I was not a person to him. I was content. I was drama for his stream. "Mama is fine," Dante said, addressing the camera, not me. "We had to make some hard decisions. You see, guys, when you are the only one stepping up to take care of an aging parent, you have to do what is best for them." Mama's mind. It is not what it used to be. She was becoming a danger to herself. He looked at me then, a smirk playing on his lips, cold and calculated. "We moved her, Jazz, to a facility, a place better suited for her. Limited mental capacity. She was forgetting things. She was getting aggressive. I had to take over. I have power of attorney now, legal guardianship. Everything you see here, it is under my management." My knees nearly buckled. A facility. Mama was sharp. She did the Sunday crosswords in pen. She managed her own rental properties. The idea of her being incompetent was a lie, a monstrous lie. "Which facility?" I demanded, stepping forward. "Take me to her. Now!" Dante stepped back, and Jessica moved to close the door. "We are not taking you anywhere," Jessica sneered. "It is late. We have guests. Real guests, not abandoners who show up looking for a handout." "You are trespassing." "Jasmine." Dante said, his voice dropping, the influencer act for a second becoming pure menace. "This is my house now. Get off my property before I call the cops. You know how they treat intruders in this neighborhood." He didn't wait for my response. He slammed the heavy door in my face. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I heard the mechanical whir of the deadbolt sliding into place, locking me out. Locking me out of my childhood, out of my mother's safety, out of the only home I had ever known. I stood there in the pouring rain, staring at the red light of the keypad. Inside, the bass turned back up, vibrating through the soles of my shoes. I gripped the handle of my suitcase until my knuckles turned white. They thought they had won. They thought the rain would wash me away. They had no idea that they had just declared war on the wrong woman. I turned away from the house, pulling out my phone. I didn't call a cab. I opened my encrypted server app. If Dante wanted to live his life online, I was going to make sure the whole world saw exactly who he really was. The game had just begun. The rain was still hammering against the roof of the Uber as we drove away from the house I grew up in. I was shivering, not from the cold, but from a rage that felt like it was burning a hole through my chest. I had nowhere to go, but I knew I could not leave until I found her. I directed the driver to the house next door. Mrs. Higgins had lived beside us for 30 years. She was the neighborhood watch commander, the gossip queen, and the woman who used to give me peppermint candies when I scraped my knee. If anyone knew where my mother was, it was her. When she opened her door, her face crumbled. She did not ask why I was wet or why I had a suitcase. She just pressed a crumpled piece of paper into my hand and whispered that she had tried to stop them. She said Dante told the police she was harassing him. The address on the paper was for a place called Shady Grove Care Center. The name sounded peaceful. The reality was a nightmare. This was not the kind of facility my mother's insurance paid for. This was not a place for a retired business owner with 3 rental properties and a savings account. Shady Grove was located 40 minutes outside the city, tucked behind an abandoned strip mall in an industrial dead zone. As I walked into the lobby, the smell hit me instantly. It was a suffocating mix of stale urine, industrial-strength bleach, and boiled cabbage. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed with a headache-inducing flicker. The linoleum floor was scuffed and peeling. There were people in wheelchairs lined up against the hallway walls, slumped over, staring at nothing. This was a warehouse for the forgotten. This was where people were sent to die when nobody wanted to pay for a funeral yet. I marched to the front desk. The receptionist barely looked up from her magazine. When I demanded to see Lucille Bennett, she smirked and told me visiting hours were over. I slammed my hand on the desk loud enough to make the security guard jump. I told her I was Jasmine Bennett, her daughter, and if she did not take me to her room in 30 seconds, I would call the state health board and live stream the conditions of this lobby to my 10,000 followers. The threat was a bluff, but the look in my eyes was not. She handed me a visitor badge with shaking hands and pointed to the third floor. Room 304. The elevator rattled as it ascended. When the doors opened on the third floor, the air felt heavier. This was the intensive care wing, though calling it that was an insult to hospitals everywhere. I counted the numbers: 300, 301, 302. When I reached 304, I hesitated. I was terrified of what I would find behind that door. I pushed it open. The room was dim, lit only by the blinking lights of a heart monitor. In the bed, a figure lay under a thin gray sheet. I walked closer, my breath catching in my throat. That could not be my mother. The woman in the bed was a skeleton. Her cheekbones protruded sharply against skin that looked like parchment paper. Her hair, usually dyed a rich mahogany and styled perfectly, was white, thin, and matted to her skull. But the detail that broke me was her hands. Her wrists were strapped to the metal rails of the bed with soft restraints. They had tied her down like an animal. I rushed to her side, fumbling with the knots. "Mom!" I whispered, tears finally spilling over. "Mama, I am here. Jazz is here." She did not move. Her eyes were closed, sunken deep into their sockets. A nurse hurried into the room looking alarmed. She was young, her eyes tired. She told me I could not touch the restraints. I spun around ready to scream, but the look on her face stopped me. She looked afraid. She checked the hallway to make sure no one was listening, then she closed the door. She whispered that my mother wasn't violent. She said they were ordered to restrain her because she kept trying to crawl out of bed to find a phone. The nurse stepped closer to me. She lowered her voice to a barely audible murmur. She told me that the admission paperwork said my mother had advanced dementia and was prone to self-harm, but the nurse said she had been working there for 10 years and she knew the difference between a fall and a beating. She pulled the sheet down slightly to reveal my mother's rib cage. Deep purple and yellow bruising covered her entire left side. The nurse said 3 ribs were broken. She said my mother was severely malnourished and dehydrated when she arrived 2 weeks ago. This was not Alzheimer's. This was torture. I felt the room spin. My brother had not just neglected her, he had broken her bones. I told the nurse I was taking her. I was taking her to Emory Hospital right now. I reached for my phone to call an ambulance. That was when the doctor walked in. Dr. Evans was a tall man with a cold, bureaucratic demeanor. He did not look at my mother. He looked at his clipboard. He asked who I was. When I told him, he shook his head. He said I had no authority here. He said Dante Bennett was the legal guardian and held medical power of attorney. He said Dante had left strict instructions that no one was to move her or visit her without his written permission. I argued. I threatened. I told him about the bruises. Dr. Evans looked at me with dead eyes and said the injuries were consistent with a fall down the stairs, just as the guardian had reported. He said if I tried to remove her, he would have me arrested for kidnapping. He told me to leave before he called security. The law was a wall, and I was crashing against it at full speed. As the security guard escorted me out, I begged for 5 minutes to collect her personal effects. The nurse, the only person with a soul in that building, handed me a plastic bag labeled with my mother's name. I took it into the hallway. Inside was her Bible, her reading glasses, and her cell phone. I sat on a plastic chair in the waiting room, ignoring the guard's glare, and pulled out the phone. The screen was shattered, spiderwebbed with cracks, as if it had been stomped on. I pressed the power button. Miraculously, the battery had 4% left. It flickered to life. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely type in her passcode. It was my birthday. I went straight to the call log. My heart stopped. There were 50 outgoing calls to my number in the last 2 weeks. 50. Every single one of them had a red circle with a line through it, blocked. I checked the settings. My number had been added to the system block list on her phone. But that wasn't all. I opened her text messages. There were drafted messages to me that were never sent. Messages that said Dante is hurting me. Messages that said help me Jazz. Messages that said he wants the papers signed. He had isolated her, he had beaten her, and he had used his tech savvy to make sure her screams for help never left this device. I was not just looking at a phone. I was looking at a crime scene. My own phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. I pulled it out. It was a text from Dante. I stared at the screen, the white letters glowing against the dark background. The message read simply, "Do not try to save the old woman. I am the one who pays the bill for that machine she is hooked up to." I hold her breathing tube in my hand. "Walk away, Jazz. Or I pull the plug." I looked up at the ceiling, blinking back the tears. The sadness evaporated. In its place was a cold, hard resolve. He thought he was holding all the cards. He thought threatening her life would make me run back to Brazil. He was wrong. He had just given me the motivation I needed to burn his entire world to the ground. I stood up, put my mother's broken phone in my pocket, and walked out of the nursing home. I was not going to the police. The police had failed. The police? I was going back to my hotel to open my laptop. If Dante wanted to play games with technology, he was about to learn why I was the highest-paid cybersecurity consultant in South America. I was going to turn his own digital footprint into a noose. I drove straight to the 4th precinct with the desperation of a woman who still believed that the truth mattered. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I had photos of my mother's bruises on my phone. I had the testimony of the nurse who was too afraid to speak on the record, but had whispered the truth to me. I had the call logs showing isolation. In my mind, this was an open and shut case of elder abuse. I marched into the station and demanded to speak to a detective. I told them everything. I told them about the financial exploitation, the physical signs of torture, the sudden change in locks. The officer at the desk looked tired, but the photos of my mother's battered ribcage got his attention. 2 patrol cars followed me back to the house in Cascade Heights. I felt a surge of grim satisfaction. Dante thought he was untouchable, but nobody is above the law. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was silent. The matte black Range Rover was parked perfectly. The loud trap music was gone. The front porch light was on, casting a warm, inviting glow. It looked like a normal family home. When the officers knocked, Dante opened the door immediately. He was not wearing the gold chains or the expensive streetwear from earlier. He was wearing a beige polo shirt and reading glasses. He looked like a concerned, responsible son. He looked at the police with wide, innocent eyes and invited them in before they could even ask. I tried to push past the officers, shouting that he was a liar, but Officer Miller held me back. Dante led us into the living room. It was spotless. The empty champagne bottles were gone. The smell of weed had been replaced by the scent of fresh coffee. On the coffee table there was a thick leather-bound binder. Dante did not wait for the police to accuse him. He took control of the narrative instantly. Officers. "I assume my sister has told you some wild stories," Dante said, his voice calm and steady. "She just arrived from Brazil a few hours ago. She has not seen our mother in 3 years. She does not understand the reality of the situation." He opened the binder. It was filled with medical records, pages and pages of them. He slid a document across the table to Officer Miller. "This is a signed statement from Dr. Evans, the head of geriatric care at Shady Grove. As you can see, my mother was diagnosed with aggressive, violent dementia 6 months ago. The bruising my sister is screaming about. It happened last week when Mom tried to throw herself down the stairs because she hallucinated that the house was on fire. I caught her, but she struggled. That is how she got hurt." I saved her life, and this is the thanks I get. I felt the blood drain from my face. That was a lie. A meticulously crafted, documented lie. That is not true, I screamed. The nurse told me she was malnourished. You are starving her to make her weak. Jessica walked into the room then. She was no longer wearing my mother's silk robe. She was dressed in modest slacks and a cardigan holding a tray of cookies. She set the tray down and immediately burst into tears. It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. We try so hard, she sobbed, clinging to Dante's arm. We visit her every day. We pay for the best care. Jazz doesn't know what it's like. She hasn't been here to change the diapers or deal with the screaming fits. We have sacrificed our entire lives to keep Mom safe, and now she comes back and treats us like criminals. Officer Miller looked from the weeping Jessica to the calm Dante, and then to me. I was wet from the rain, shaking with rage and shouting accusations. In his eyes, I was not the victim. I was the unstable one. He closed the binder and handed it back to Dante. "Ma'am," the officer said, turning to me, his tone hardening. "Your brother has legal guardianship and documented medical proof explaining the injuries. This appears to be a civil dispute between siblings, not a criminal matter. We cannot remove the guardian based on your speculation. But he is killing her," I pleaded, grabbing the officer's arm. "You have to check his bank accounts. He is spending her money on cars and parties." Dante sighed, a sound of pure exhaustion. "Officer, I did not want to do this, but I have no choice. My sister has a history of mental instability. That is why she left the country. I feared she would come back and cause a scene like this." He reached behind the sofa and pulled out a manila envelope. He handed a paper to the officer. The officer read it and nodded. "Miss Bennett, this is a temporary restraining order," the officer said. "It was filed by your brother's attorney this afternoon. It states that you are to remain at least 500 feet away from Dante Bennett, Jessica Bennett, and Lucille Bennett. That includes the residence and the care facility." I stared at the paper. It was signed by a judge. The timestamp was from 2 hours ago. Dante had called his lawyer the second I left the porch. He had used my mother's own money to pay for a lawyer to keep me away from her. "If you do not leave this property immediately," the officer continued, his hand resting on his belt, "I will have to arrest you for violating a court order. You are trespassing, ma'am. Go home." I looked at Dante. He was standing behind the police officer, just out of his line of sight. A small cold smile played on his lips. He mouthed 2 words to me: "Game over." I stumbled back out into the rain. The police watched me until I got into my Uber. As we drove away, I looked back at the house. The lights in the living room turned off. They were probably opening another bottle of champagne to celebrate. I sat in the back of the car, feeling a kind of emptiness I had never known. The system I had trusted had just handed my mother over to her executioner. The police were not going to save her. The doctors were on his payroll. The law was a weapon, and Dante had bought the trigger. I was completely alone in a city that used to be my home. But as the initial shock faded, something else took its place. The officer had called it a civil matter. He had told me to go home. He did not know that I had no home to go to, and he did not know that by closing the door on justice, he had opened the door to vengeance. Dante thought the restraining order was a shield. He did not realize it was a target. If I could not use the law to stop him, I would use the one thing he loved more than himself. I would use his vanity. I would not fight him in court. I would fight him in the cloud. And unlike the police, I would not need a warrant to enter his life. I would tear it apart from the inside out. The police station doors had closed behind me, leaving me standing on the wet pavement with a piece of paper that legally forbade me from seeing my own mother. The law had failed. It was a cold, bureaucratic machine that only understood paperwork, not truth. But I still had one card left to play. I had family. The extended Bennett clan was large, loud, and supposedly tight-knit. These were the people my mother had carried on her back for decades. She had paid for Aunt May's gallstone surgery when she had no insurance. She had covered the down payment on Uncle Ben's house when the bank turned him away. Surely once they saw the photos of her bruised ribs, once they knew she was being starved in a state facility, they would rise up. They would march to that house and drag Dante out by his collar. I got into my car and drove toward Aunt May's house in Stone Mountain, clinging to the naive hope that blood was thicker than money. I knew they were gathering there. It was the third Sunday of the month, the traditional day for the Bennett family barbecue. Usually, I would have received a dozen text messages reminding me to bring my famous potato salad. This time, my phone was silent. When I pulled up to the curb, the smell of hickory smoke and grilled ribs drifted through the window, triggering a wave of nostalgia that instantly turned into nausea. The driveway was packed with cars. I recognized Dante's Range Rover, parked right in front, gleaming like a trophy. He was already here. He was already spinning his web. I walked up the driveway, my boots crunching on the gravel. Laughter floated from the backyard, the sound of people without a care in the world. I unlatched the gate and stepped into the yard. The laughter died instantly. It was as if someone had cut the power to a speaker. 20 pairs of eyes turned to look at me. Cousins holding beer bottles, aunts fanning themselves on lawn chairs, uncles playing dominoes at the picnic table. Nobody smiled. Nobody shouted my name. They looked at me like I was a stranger, or worse, a ghost that had come to haunt their good time. Aunt May was the first to move. She wiped her hands on her apron and marched over to me. She did not open her arms for a hug. She crossed them over her chest, forming a barrier. "We didn't think you would show up," May said, her voice flat and hard. "Dante said you were back in town causing trouble." "Trouble?" I asked, my voice shaking slightly. "Is that what he calls it?" I pulled out my phone and brought up the picture of Mom's face swollen and purple. "Look at this, Aunt May. Look at your sister. Dante did this. He has her locked up in a place that smells like urine. He is starving her." I held the phone out to the crowd, turning in a circle so everyone could see. "Look at what he is doing to the woman who put food on all of your tables. We have to go get her. We have to stop him." I waited for the gasps. I waited for the anger. Instead, I saw Uncle Ben roll his wheelchair forward. It was brand new, a top-of-the-line electric model with leather seats and a joystick control. It must have cost $4,000. "Put that phone away, Jasmine," Uncle Ben said, his voice stern. "We know about Lucille's condition. Dante told us everything. She fell down the stairs because she was confused. Dante is the only one strong enough to handle her episodes. He is lying." I screamed, frustration boiling over. "He is drugging her." "And where did you get that wheelchair, Uncle Ben? Mom told me you were denied the grant for it last year." Ben patted the armrest of his new chair, looking at me with disdain. "Dante bought it for me. He said it was what Lucille would have wanted. He is a good boy. He steps up. Unlike some people who run off to foreign countries and forget where they came from." The realization hit me like a physical blow. I looked around the yard. Cousin Kiki was wearing a new designer bag. Aunt May had a new patio set. The upgrades were everywhere. Dante hadn't just stolen my mother's money to buy cars for himself. He had distributed the loot. He had bought their silence with gifts, using my mother's life savings to purchase the title of the favorite son. "You are all being paid off," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that cut through the silence. "That is not Dante's money. That is Mom's retirement. That is the money she saved from 40 years of scrubbing stains out of other people's clothes. He is stealing her future to buy you toys, and you are letting him kill her for it." Aunt May stepped closer, getting right in my face. Her eyes were cold, devoid of the warmth I remembered from my childhood. "You listen to me, little girl," May hissed. "You have been gone for 3 years. You were sipping cocktails on a beach in Brazil, while Dante was here driving Lucille to her appointments, cooking her meals, and managing her properties. He is tired. He deserves to be compensated for his time. If he wants to help family with the extra money, that is his business." "He is not helping family," I countered, tears stinging my eyes. He is buying accomplices. When the money runs out, do you think he will still come around? He will throw you all away just like he threw Mom away. Dante stepped out from the back door of the house then. He was holding a beer, looking relaxed and untouchable. He didn't even have to speak. He just looked at Aunt May, then looked at the gate. "I think you should leave," Jasmine May said, turning her back on me. "You are upsetting the family. This is a private gathering. If you don't go, Ben will call the sheriff. And you know we don't want you getting arrested in front of the neighbors." I looked at them one last time. My family. The people I had sent Christmas cards to. The people I had loved. They were feasting on the carcass of my mother's legacy, happy to look the other way, as long as the checks cleared. There was no saving them. They were infected with the same greed that had consumed my brother. "I am not the one who is lost," I said, my voice steady, now hardened by the betrayal. "Enjoy the barbecue. I hope the ribs taste good. Because they were paid for with your sister's blood." I turned and walked out of the gate. I didn't look back. I didn't cry. The sadness that had weighed me down since the airport was gone. It had been burned away by a white-hot clarity. I was alone, truly, completely alone. But there was power in that. I didn't have to worry about protecting the family reputation anymore. I didn't have to worry about hurting Aunt May's feelings or disrespecting Uncle Ben. They had chosen their side. They had chosen the money. As I sat in my car watching them high-five Dante through the fence, I made a vow. I would not just take Dante down. I would expose every single one of them. I would make sure that when the truth came out, they would all drown in the shame of what they had done. I started the engine. The time for pleading was over. It was time to stop being the daughter and start being the hunter. I drove back to the hotel, took out my laptop, and prepared to unleash a digital apocalypse. They wanted to see what technology could do. I was about to show them. The Omni Hotel stood like a glass sentinel directly across the street from the entrance of the subdivision where my mother lived. I did not choose it for the amenities or the room service. I chose it because room 412 offered a direct, unobstructed line of sight to the master bedroom window of the house my brother had stolen. I swiped the keycard and let the heavy door click shut behind me, locking out the noise of the city and the stinging memory of my aunt's betrayal. I did not throw myself on the bed to cry. I did not pace the floor. The time for grieving was over. The time for warfare had begun. I hoisted my black Pelican hard case onto the mahogany desk. To the untrained eye, it looked like luggage for a musician or a photographer. I flipped the heavy latches and lifted the lid. Inside, there were no clothes, no toiletries, no sentimental trinkets. Nestled in the custom-cut foam was the tools of my trade: a high-powered directional Wi-Fi antenna, a portable server deck running a custom Linux distribution, and a signal interceptor that I had built myself during long sleepless nights in Rio. I set up the antenna on the tripod near the window, angling it precisely toward the brick colonial house across the street. Through the sheer curtains, I could see the faint blue glow of a television in the living room. Dante and Jessica were probably watching a movie, relaxing in the home they had turned into a fortress. They thought the restraining order was a wall. They did not realize that walls mean nothing to a signal that travels at the speed of light. I sat down at the desk and booted up my rig. The screen washed my face in a cool green light. I pulled up the network scanner. Within seconds, a list of available networks populated the screen. There it was, Bennett_Manor. The signal strength was excellent. I cracked my knuckles, a habit I had picked up when I was just a teenager coding in my bedroom. Dante had always bragged about being tech-savvy because he knew how to use Instagram filters and edit TikTok videos. But when it came to actual network security, he was a child playing with fire. He was using a standard WPA2 encryption protocol with a default gateway. I ran a dictionary attack script. It took the system less than 3 minutes to find the password. It was Moneymaker 1990. Of course it was. I was in. The digital layout of the house unfolded on my screen like a blueprint. I could see every device connected to the router. 2 iPhones, a MacBook Pro, 3 smart TVs, a smart refrigerator, and the security cameras. I bypassed the firewall effortlessly, ghosting into the system so that no logs would record my presence. I was invisible. I was the ghost in the machine. I started with the cameras. I needed eyes on the inside. I pulled up the feed from the living room. There they were. Dante was sprawled on the couch scrolling through his phone. Jessica was in the kitchen pouring a glass of wine. They looked so normal, so domestic. It made my skin crawl. But watching them eat pizza was not going to get my mother back. I needed evidence. I needed to know what was happening behind the scenes. I navigated to the backups for the MacBook Pro. It was shared by both of them, but I saw a user profile labeled Jessica_personal. I clicked on it. Jessica was a pharmacist. She had a doctorate in pharmacy. When Dante married her, my mother was so proud. She thought we were bringing a medical professional into the family, someone who would take care of us. I opened her browser history. At first it was mundane. Online shopping for designer shoes, vacation packages to the Maldives, reservations at 5-star steakhouses. Just the typical spending habits of a woman burning through an inheritance she did not earn. I scrolled back further to the weeks before my mother was hospitalized. The search terms changed. They became dark, specific, clinical. My breath hitched in my throat as I read the first query. Side effects of haloperidol in geriatric patients. I knew what haloperidol was. It was a powerful antipsychotic used to treat schizophrenia. It was not meant for a healthy 65-year-old woman. I scrolled down. I scrolled. The next search was even worse. How to induce symptoms of early onset dementia. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a gasp. I clicked on the link she had visited. It was a medical forum discussing drug interactions. She had been researching. She had been studying how to break my mother's mind. I kept reading, my eyes scanning the screen with a mixture of horror and fascination. Symptoms of dehydration in elderly. How to hide bruises from social workers. Interaction between sedatives and insulin in non-diabetics. I froze. Insulin. My mother was not diabetic. I clicked on the last search term. Lethal dose of insulin that leaves the system quickly. The room seemed to tilt. I grabbed the edge of the desk to steady myself. This was not negligence. This was not just a greedy son wanting control of the finances. This was attempted murder. Jessica had used her medical knowledge to systematically poison my mother. The confusion, the falls, the slurred speech that Dante claimed was dementia. It was all manufactured. They had drugged her to make her pliable, to make her sign the power of attorney, and when she fought back, they increased the dose until she broke. I looked up from the screen, staring through the window at the house. It no longer looked like a home. It looked like a crime scene. Jessica was not just a complicit wife. She was the architect of my mother's destruction. She was in that kitchen right now, drinking wine, knowing that she had almost killed a woman who had welcomed her with open arms. A cold, hard resolve settled over me, heavier and more permanent than the grief. I took a screenshot of the browser history. Then I downloaded her entire cloud backup, every text message, every email, every photo. I had come here thinking I was fighting a legal battle. I thought I was fighting for assets and guardianship. I was wrong. I was fighting for my mother's life against 2 sociopaths who were actively trying to end it. I leaned back in the chair, the hum of the cooling fans the only sound in the room. I was not going to call the police. Not yet. The police had already proven they could be fooled by a white coat and a fake medical file. If I went to them now with screenshots, Dante's lawyer would claim I hacked them, that I fabricated the evidence. It would be inadmissible. No. I needed something undeniable. I needed a confession. Or better yet, I needed to catch them in the act. I looked at the file directory on Dante's phone. There was a folder hidden deep in the system partition, encrypted with a secondary password. It was labeled Project_Legacy. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. If Jessica's history was the smoking gun, whatever was in Dante's folder was the bullet. I started the decryption algorithm. It would take a few hours. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. Across the street, the lights in the living room went out. They were going to sleep. They probably slept soundly, thinking they had won, thinking the annoying sister had been scared off by a piece of paper from a judge. "Sleep well, Dante," I whispered to the darkness. "Because when I am done with you, you will never sleep peacefully again." I turned back to the glowing screens. The hunt was on, and I had just found the scent of blood. The decryption software on my laptop screen finally flashed green. Access granted. The words pulsed with a toxic neon glow against the darkness of my hotel room. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of dread and anticipation. I had spent the last 2 hours cracking the secondary encryption on Dante's hidden partition. He had named the folder simply Secret Project. It sounded innocent, like a business plan or a surprise anniversary gift for Jessica. But my gut told me I was about to open a door into hell. I hovered the cursor over the folder icon. My hand trembled. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against whatever I was about to see, and clicked. The folder opened to reveal hundreds of video files organized by date. But it was not just a random collection. It was a production archive. There were subfolders labeled Pranks, Reactions, and VIP Requests. My stomach tightened. I opened a text file labeled Revenue. It was a spreadsheet. I scanned the columns: dates, usernames, dollar amounts. The totals at the bottom of the monthly columns were staggering. $5,000, $8,000. My brother was not just living off my mother's savings, he was generating income. But from what? I clicked on the most recent video file in the VIP requests folder. The media player opened. The footage was shaky at first, shot from a first-person perspective, likely from a phone held in Dante's hand. The setting was my mother's bedroom. The timestamp indicated it was filmed at 3 in the morning just last week. The room was dark, illuminated only by the harsh artificial light of the phone's flash. My mother was asleep in her bed. She looked so small, curled up under the thin blanket, her breathing shallow and fragile. In the video, Dante whispered to the camera, "Watch this, guys. The Sleeping Beauty needs a wake-up call. This one is for user Dark Knight, who dropped $500 for the Ice Bucket Challenge." My breath hitched. On the screen, Dante's free hand came into view. He was holding a large plastic pitcher filled with ice and water. He did not hesitate. He did not pause to consider that this was the woman who gave him life. He upended the pitcher directly over her face. The reaction was immediate and heart-wrenching. My mother gasped, her body convulsing in shock as the freezing water hit her. She flailed, choking, trying to sit up, her eyes wide with terror and confusion. Dante's laughter exploded from the speakers. It was a cruel hyena-like cackle. "Look at her go!" he shouted. "She thinks the roof is leaking." On the screen, notifications popped up over the video feed, emojis of laughing faces, comments rolling in. "Do it again. She looks like a wet rat." And then a donation alert chimed. $500 added to wallet. Dante was not just torturing her, he was live-streaming it to a private group of sick voyeurs who paid to watch an elderly woman suffer. I forced myself to keep watching, even though every instinct in my body screamed to look away. I needed to know the extent of the depravity. I clicked on another video. This one was filmed in the kitchen. The camera was steady this time, set up on a tripod. Jessica was in the frame. She was holding a can of dog food. The wet, meaty sound of the can opening made my skin crawl. Jessica dumped the contents into a ceramic bowl. She turned to the camera and winked. Then she turned to my mother, who was sitting at the kitchen table looking dazed and vacant. "Mama," Jessica said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Dinner is ready. I made your favorite stew." She placed the bowl of dog food in front of my mother. My mother looked at it, then looked up at Jessica with clouded eyes. "I am not hungry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Eat it!" Jessica snapped, her face twisting into a mask of cruelty. "You are confused, Lucille. This is expensive beef stew. Do not be ungrateful. The doctor said you need protein. Eat it, or you go to your room without anything. My mother, broken and drugged, picked up the spoon. She took a bite. She gagged. Jessica burst out laughing, clapping her hands. "Oh my God, she is actually eating it!" Jessica shrieked. "You guys owe me big for this one." A graphic overlay on the video lit up. Platinum member donated $1,000. I could not watch anymore. I slammed the laptop lid shut, but the image of my mother eating dog food was burned into my retinas. A wave of nausea rolled over me, violent and uncontrollable. I scrambled off the chair and ran to the bathroom. I barely made it to the toilet before I emptied my stomach. Acid burned my throat. I gagged and retched until there was nothing left my body, trying to physically purge the evil I had just witnessed. I collapsed on the cold tile floor, gasping for air. Tears streamed down my face, hot and blinding. I had been in Brazil securing networks for oil companies, drinking caipirinhas on the weekends while my mother was living in a house of horrors. I had let this happen. The guilt was a physical weight crushing my chest. I screamed. It was a raw, primal sound that tore from the bottom of my lungs. I scrambled to my feet and punched the bathroom wall. I punched it again, and again. The pain in my hand was sharp and grounding. I wanted to break my knuckles. I wanted to feel something other than this suffocating shame. Blood smeared on the white paint, bright red against the sterile surface. I stood there for a long time, staring at my bloody hand, my chest heaving. The physical pain brought me back to reality. It sharpened my focus. Crying would not save her. Guilt would not save her. Only action would save her. I walked back into the main room. I went to the mini bar and grabbed a bottle of water. I washed the blood off my hand and wrapped it in a towel. Then I sat back down at the desk. I opened the laptop. I was done feeling sad. I was done feeling helpless. The emotions calcified into something cold and hard like a diamond. I looked at the folder again. This was not just evidence of abuse. This was evidence of a criminal enterprise. Wire fraud, illegal distribution of obscene material, tax evasion. But prison was too good for them. If I went to the police now, they would be arrested, yes. They would go to trial in a year. They might get out on bail. They might plead insanity. And the world would never truly know what they did. They would just be another news headline. No, I did not want them in a cell. Not yet. I wanted them to feel what my mother felt. I wanted them to feel the ice water of public humiliation. I wanted them to be fed the dog food of total social isolation. I wanted to strip them of every ounce of dignity, every friend, every dollar, every shred of their reputation. I inserted a high-capacity external hard drive into the USB port. I selected the entire secret project folder. I hit copy. The progress bar appeared. Estimated time remaining 15 minutes. I watched the blue bar inch forward, mesmerized. Every megabyte was a nail in their coffin. Dante wanted to be an influencer. He wanted to be famous. He wanted the world to watch him. I leaned back in the chair, a dark, humorless smile touching my lips. Be careful what you wish for, brother. I was going to give him the biggest audience of his life. I was going to turn his launch party into a public execution. And when the world saw these videos, there would be no lawyer, no judge, and no amount of money that could save him. He was already dead. He just did not know it yet. The file transfer chime sounded. Complete. I pulled the drive out and held it in my hand. It felt heavy. It felt like justice. I stared at the hard drive in my hand, the weight of it feeling heavier than just metal and plastic. It contained enough evidence to send my brother and sister-in-law to federal prison for decades. But prison was not enough. Prison was a sterile, bureaucratic punishment. I wanted them to feel the panic I felt when I saw my mother's bruises. I wanted them to feel the humiliation of being stripped of everything. For that to happen, I needed total control. I needed to be the puppet master pulling their strings while they danced on the edge of a cliff. To do that, I had to do the one thing that went against every fiber of my being. I had to lose. I picked up my phone and dialed Dante's number. My hand was steady, but I forced my voice to tremble. I forced tears into my eyes until my throat felt tight and constricted. When he answered, I let out a shaky, broken breath. "Dante," I whispered, sounding defeated. "Please don't hang up." "What do you want?" Dante snapped. His voice was arrogant, the voice of a man who thought he had already won. "The restraining order is clear. You call me again and you are going to jail." "I know," I sobbed, letting the desperation bleed into the phone. "I know, Dante. You won." "Okay. You won. I can't do this anymore. I saw the medical reports. Maybe I was wrong. I am just tired. I am out of money. The lawyers won't take my calls. I just want to go back to Brazil." There was a pause on the other end. I could practically hear his ego inflating. He put me on speakerphone. I heard Jessica's shrill voice in the background. "Finally coming to your senses, are we?" Jessica sneered. "We told you that you were crazy." I swallowed my rage, tasting bile. "I just want this to be over," I said, making my voice sound small. "I booked a flight for tomorrow morning. I will be out of your lives forever. But I need one favor. Just one." Dante scoffed. "You are in no position to ask for favors." "It is about Dad's watch," I said, "the gold Rolex he left in the safe. I know Mom gave it to you, but it is the only thing I have left of him. I want to buy it from you." Silence. Then I heard the greed seep into his tone. "Buy it? With what money? You just said you were broke." "I have a stash," I lied smoothly. "Cash. From a contract I finished in Rio, $50,000. I brought it with me to pay for Mom's care, but since you are the guardian, I will give it all to you. Just for the watch. $50,000. I knew that number would short-circuit their brains. They were cash poor, spending money as fast as they stole it. 50 grand was a new car. It was a luxury vacation. It was irresistible. "Meet me at the Starbucks on Abernathy in 30 minutes, Dante said. "Come alone. And bring the cash. If you try anything funny, I call the cops." I hung up and wiped the fake tears from my face. I went to the hotel safe and pulled out the envelope of cash I always traveled with for emergencies. It wasn't 50,000, but the stack looked thick enough to fool them for the 5 minutes I needed. I checked my pocket for the micro SD card. It was loaded with a payload specifically designed for Dante's phone model. I grabbed my keys. It was showtime. The Starbucks was crowded, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and the hum of conversation. Dante and Jessica were sitting in a corner booth looking like royalty holding court. Dante was wearing sunglasses indoors. Jessica was scrolling through her phone looking bored. When they saw me, they didn't smile. They just stared, assessing me like I was a bug they had already crushed. I walked over, keeping my shoulders slumped, my eyes downcast. I sat across from them, clutching my bag to my chest. "Do you have it?" Dante asked, not bothering with a greeting. I nodded nervously. "Do you have the watch?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out our father's watch. He slid it across the table, his hand hovering over it protectively. "Show me the money first." I opened my bag just enough for them to see the thick stacks of $100 bills. Their eyes widened. The hostility in their faces was replaced instantly by a hungry, feral gleam. Jessica actually licked her lips. "Fine," Dante said, snatching the envelope from my hand before I could even fully take it out. He began counting it right there on the table, his fingers moving frantically. I watched him, my heart pounding. This was the moment. I needed a distraction. I needed his phone. "Dante," I said softly, "while you count, can I delete my number from your phone? I don't want you to have it anymore. I don't want any connection. I just want to disappear." He laughed, a cruel barking sound. He didn't even look up from the money. He tossed his phone onto the table like it was a piece of trash. "Knock yourself out. Just don't touch anything else or I will break your fingers." I picked up the phone. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from adrenaline. I unlocked it. The passcode was still 123456. He was so predictable. I pretended to fumble with the contacts list, but my thumb was moving with lightning speed. I inserted the micro SD card into the slot on the side of his phone case. It was sleek and visible. The upload began instantly. My custom malware Ghost Rat bypassed his security protocols in seconds. It wasn't just deleting a number. It was granting me root access, admin privileges. I would be able to control his camera, his microphone, his screen, and his social media accounts remotely. I would see everything he saw. I would hear every word he said. I was putting a digital leash around his neck, and he was too busy counting my money to notice. Done, I whispered, pulling the card out and palming it. I deleted it. Dante finished counting the first stack. He looked satisfied. He didn't even realize the envelope was mostly filler paper in the middle. He was too arrogant to check thoroughly. He shoved the money into his jacket pocket and grabbed the phone from my hand. Good riddance, he said, standing up. Don't miss your flight, Jazz. If I see you in Atlanta again, the deal is off and I am calling the sheriff. Jessica stood up too, smoothing her skirt. She looked at me with a smirk that was pure venom. Goodbye, sweetie. Don't worry about Mom. We will spend this money on something she would really enjoy, like a spa weekend for us. They walked out of the coffee shop laughing high on their victory. They thought they had just scammed their stupid sister out of 50 grand. They thought they had bullied me into submission. I sat there for a moment watching them get into the Range Rover. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was bitter, but it tasted like victory. I pulled out my own phone. A new icon had appeared on my dashboard. Target acquired, Dante _iPhone 15, status online. I tapped the icon. The audio feed from his car filled my earpiece. Can you believe she actually fell for it? Dante was saying, his voice crystal clear. What a loser. We are going to be rich, baby. I watched their car pull out of the parking lot and merge into traffic. They were driving away with $50,000 of fake money and a digital bomb in their pocket. You are not rich, Dante, I whispered to the empty chair across from me. You are owned. I stood up and walked out of the Starbucks. The sun was shining. The air felt lighter. I checked the time. The launch party for his energy drink was in 48 hours. That was plenty of time to prepare. I had the evidence. I had the access. And now, I had the element of surprise. Dante had called me a fool. He had called me weak. But as I walked down the street, a genuine smile spread across my face for the first time in days. He was right about one thing. I was leaving the old Jazz behind. The sister who wanted to keep the peace was gone. The woman who was walking toward the hotel was the executioner. Welcome to hell, brother, I said softly. I hope you enjoy the heat. The $50,000 I had handed over in the coffee shop burned a hole in my brother's pocket, faster than a match striking paper. He did not use it to pay off the mounting debts he had accumulated, or to improve the substandard care our mother was receiving. Instead, he used it to fuel his delusion. Within 24 hours, Dante had booked the Grand Starlight Ballroom, the most ostentatious venue in downtown Atlanta. He was throwing a launch party for his new venture, a caffeine-loaded poison he called Beast Mode Energy. He had plastered his face on billboards, sent VIP invites to every influencer in the city, and hired a PR firm to spin his narrative. The story he was selling was disgusting in its irony. He was branding himself as the devoted son who sacrificed his dreams to care for his sick mother, and this energy drink was the symbol of his resilience. He was building an empire on a foundation of lies funded by the sister he thought he had scammed. From my command center in room 412, I watched the preparations unfold through the digital window of his phone. I saw the text messages confirming the catering, the lighting rig, and the arrival of the local news crews. He wanted a spectacle. He wanted the world to look at him. I sat in the darkened hotel room, the glow of the monitors reflecting in my eyes, and whispered to the screen that he would get exactly what he wanted. But while Dante was busy playing the role of the mogul, my attention shifted to the other monitor, the live feed from the Shady Grove Care Center. It was 7 in the evening. The party was scheduled to start at 8. But Jessica was not at the ballroom helping her husband. She was in room 304. The camera angle from the hidden lens I had installed earlier gave me a perfect view of the bed. My mother was propped up on pillows, looking more frail than I had ever seen her. Her eyes were glassy, likely from the heavy sedation Jessica kept her under. Jessica stood over her, not with a bowl of soup or a comforting hand, but with a thick stack of documents and a pen. I turned up the volume on my headset, pressing the earpiece deeper until it hurt. The audio was crisp. Jessica's voice was low and urgent, lacking the syrupy sweetness she used when Dante was filming. "Sign it, Lucille," Jessica hissed, thrusting the pen into my mother's trembling hand. "We do not have all day. Dante needs this done before the party starts." My mother mumbled something unintelligible, her hand weak and uncoordinated. The pen slipped from her fingers and fell onto the sheets. Jessica let out a frustrated growl. She grabbed my mother's hand, roughly jamming the pen back between her fingers. "Focus!" Jessica snapped. "It is just a signature. Do it, or I swear to God I will tell the nurse to skip your pain medication tonight. You know how much your ribs hurt when the medicine wears off? Do you want that?" I felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it nearly made me dizzy. I zoomed in on the document through the camera feed. The resolution was grainy, but the bold header at the top of the page was unmistakable. It was a universal life insurance policy. I scanned the text, my eyes darting frantically. The beneficiary was listed clearly as Dante Bennett. The payout amount made my blood run cold. $2 million. The pieces of their monstrous puzzle finally clicked into place. The neglect, the starvation, the isolation. It was all leading to this. They did not just want her assets. They wanted the death benefit. The $50,000 I gave them was just the bridge money to pay the premium on this policy and fund the party. Once this paper was signed, my mother became worth more dead than alive. The falls down the stairs would stop being accidents. They would become fatal. Dante was planning to launch his career tonight, and next week he would launch his mother's funeral to gain the sympathy vote and a $2 million check. I watched in horror as Jessica guided my mother's limp hand across the paper. The signature was shaky, barely legible, but it was there. The ink was barely dry before Jessica snatched the papers away, stuffing them into her designer bag. "Good girl," Jessica sneered, patting my mother's cheek with a patronizing tap. "Now go back to sleep. You have served your purpose." Jessica turned and walked out of the room, leaving my mother alone in the dark. I sat back in my chair, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The timeline had shifted. This was no longer a game of social humiliation. This was a rescue mission. As long as that policy was active, every second my mother breathed was a second she was in mortal danger. I could not wait for the law. I could not wait for an investigation. I had to destroy them tonight. I had to make Dante so toxic, so criminal, and so reviled that no insurance company would ever pay out a claim to him. I had to save her life by ruining his. I stood up and walked to the closet. I had packed mostly tactical gear, sensible clothes for surveillance. But hanging in the back was a dress I had bought in Rio for a gala that never happened. It was not black. I did not want to blend into the shadows tonight. It was red, a deep, violent crimson that looked like fresh blood under the lights. It was a dress that demanded attention. It was a dress that said I was not afraid. I slipped into the silk, the fabric cool against my skin. It fit like a second skin, sharp and structured. I pulled my hair back into a tight, severe bun. I applied my makeup with the precision of a warrior applying war paint. Dark eyeliner, blood-red lipstick. I looked in the mirror. The sad, desperate sister who had begged for a watch in the coffee shop was gone. Staring back at me was the angel of death. I walked back to the desk and ejected the external hard drive. This was the weapon. I placed it carefully into my clutch. I checked my phone. I had full administrative access to the audiovisual system at the Starlight Ballroom. Dante had connected his phone to the venue's Bluetooth to play his hype music. He had essentially handed me the keys to the castle. I slipped my feet into stiletto heels. They were sharp enough to puncture. I grabbed my room key and walked to the door. I paused for a moment, looking back at the screen where my mother lay sleeping. "Hold on, Mama," I whispered. "Just hold on a few more hours." I stepped out into the hallway, the heavy door clicking shut behind me. The sound was final. I walked to the elevator, the click-clack of my heels echoing on the marble floor. I was not going to a party. I was not going to toast to my brother's success. I was going to a slaughter. Tonight, Dante Bennett was going to learn that you can wear a suit and rent a ballroom, but you cannot hide from the truth when it walks through the front door wearing red. The executioner had arrived. The grand starlight ballroom was vibrating with an energy that felt less like a celebration and more like a coronation. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume, freshly cut lilies, and the distinct metallic tang of unearned wealth. I stood at the back of the room for a moment, hidden by the shadows of the velvet curtains, just watching. It was grotesque. My brother had transformed the fruits of his crimes into a spectacle of gold and crystal. There were champagne towers that reached toward the ceiling, overflowing with vintage bubbly that cost more per bottle than my mother's monthly medication. Waiters in white gloves moved silently through the crowd, offering trays of caviar and truffle oil hors d'oeuvres. But the most nauseating part was not the decor. It was the guests. The entire Bennett clan was there, a sea of familiar faces draped in luxury they had not paid for. Aunt May was wearing a sequined gown that strained against her frame, laughing loudly with a glass of wine in her hand, her wrist adorned with a diamond bracelet that I knew for a fact was bought with the proceeds from selling my mother's rental property on 4th Street. Uncle Ben was holding court near the bar, looking distinguished in a tuxedo, sitting in the electric wheelchair that was the price of his silence. They were drinking, eating, and dancing on the grave of my mother's dignity, and they looked like they were having the time of their lives. I shifted my gaze to the stage. It was bathed in a soft, heavenly spotlight. In the center stood Dante. He looked every inch the self-made mogul he pretended to be. He was wearing a bespoke suit that fit him perfectly, a microphone in one hand and a can of beast mode energy in the other. Behind him, a massive LED screen displayed a live counter of his viewership. The numbers were scrolling up so fast they were a blur. 900,000, 950,000. He was on the verge of breaking 1 million live viewers, 1 million people tuning in to listen to a monster preach about virtue. Dante lowered his head, pausing for dramatic effect. When he looked up, his eyes were glistening. He had mastered the art of the single perfect tear. "It has not been easy," Dante said, his voice cracking with practiced emotion. The crowd went silent, leaning in to catch every word. There were days when I wanted to give up. Days when the burden of caring for a sick parent felt too heavy for one man to bear. I gave up my career. I gave up my social life. I sat by her bedside for nights on end, holding her hand while she forgot who I was. But I did it because that is what family does. We sacrifice. We protect. And this drink, this brand, it is not just about energy. It is about the strength it takes to keep going when your world is falling apart. A collective sigh of sympathy rippled through the room. Someone in the front row sniffled. The view count on the screen ticked over. 1 million viewers. Confetti cannons blasted from the sides of the stage, showering the room in silver and gold paper. The applause was deafening. They were cheering for him. They were worshiping the man who had waterboarded his own mother for donations. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows. The red dress I wore was not designed to blend in. It was a beacon. It was a scream in a quiet room. The silk flowed around me like liquid fire as I began my walk down the center aisle. The click of my stiletto heels on the polished floor was sharp and rhythmic, cutting through the applause. Heads began to turn. At first it was just a few people near the back. Then a ripple of confusion spread through the room. The applause faltered. The cheering died down. People whispered, pointing at the woman in red who walked with the cold determination of an assassin. Aunt May saw me first. Her jaw dropped and she nearly spilled her wine. Uncle Ben spun his wheelchair around, his eyes widening in alarm. I did not look at them. I kept my eyes locked on the stage, locked on him. Jessica was standing at the foot of the stairs leading up to the stage. She saw me coming, and her face went pale. She rushed forward to intercept me, her hands raised in a panic. "What are you doing here?" she hissed, her voice trembling. "You are not on the list. You have a restraining order. Get out before I call security." I stopped right in front of her. I towered over her in my heels. I leaned in close so only she could hear. "Call them," I whispered, smiling a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Call the police, Jessica. Let them come. But by the time they get here, everyone in this room and everyone watching that screen will know exactly how you paid for that dress." Jessica froze. She saw the look in my eyes. It wasn't anger. It was certainty. She stepped back, letting me pass. I reached the front row. Dante was still on stage, basking in the applause, unaware that the atmosphere in the room had shifted. He looked down and finally saw me. For a split second, his mask slipped. Genuine fear flashed across his face. He took a half step back, his grip tightening on the microphone. He looked at Jessica, who was cowering by the stairs. He looked at the security guards, who were too far away to intervene quickly. Then he looked at the screen behind him. 1 million people were watching. He could not have his security drag his sister out screaming. It would ruin the image of the benevolent saint he had just built. So he did the only thing a narcissist could do. He pivoted. He decided to use me. He smiled. It was a wide, welcoming grin that looked like a shark baring its teeth. He opened his arms wide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Dante announced, his voice booming through the speakers. "Look who has decided to join us, my little sister Jasmine," the crowd murmured. Dante walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at me with an expression of exaggerated forgiveness. "I know many of you have heard the rumors," Dante continued, playing to the camera. "You know that Jasmine left us years ago. You know she wasn't there when Mom got sick. You know she abandoned this family when we needed her most." A chorus of boos rose from the audience. He was turning them against me. He was weaponizing their loyalty. But Dante shouted, silencing them. "Tonight is a night of celebration. Tonight is a night of love. And in the spirit of this family, I choose to forgive. Jasmine, come up here. Come join your brother. Let the world see that the Bennett family is whole again." He extended his hand. It was a trap. He wanted to bring me up there, hug me, make me cry, and show the world that even the ungrateful sister bowed down to his greatness. He wanted to make me a prop in his play. I looked at his hand, then I looked at his face. He thought he was saving the situation. He had no idea he was inviting the executioner onto the scaffold. I walked up the stairs. The lights were blindingly bright. The heat from the stage lamps was intense. I walked across the platform, the sound of my heels amplified by the acoustics of the stage. I stopped in front of him. Dante pulled me into a hug. He squeezed me tight, too tight. "Play along or I will kill you," he whispered into my ear, his voice a low growl. "Smile for the camera, you ungrateful brat." I pulled back, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. I turned to face the audience. I turned to face the camera that was broadcasting to 1 million people. I reached out and took the microphone from Dante's hand. He let go of it reluctantly, confident that I wouldn't dare make a scene in front of his army of fans. I looked out at the sea of faces. I looked at Aunt May, who was glaring at me. I looked at Jessica, who was chewing her lip nervously. And then I looked directly into the lens of the camera. "Thank you, Dante," I said, my voice steady and clear, echoing through the massive hall. "Thank you for that warm welcome. You are right. I have been away for a long time. I missed so much. I missed seeing you take care of Mom. I missed seeing how you built this empire." Dante nodded beside me, preening. He thought I was capitulating. He thought I was apologizing. But I continued, my voice hardening just a fraction. Since I missed so much, I wanted to catch up. And since today is such a special day, I didn't want to come empty-handed. I brought a gift. Dante looked confused. A gift, he asked, leaning in. Yes, I said, turning to him with a smile that was sharp enough to cut glass. A video tribute. To show the world exactly what kind of man you really are. I think your 1 million followers deserve to see the real Dante Bennett. I reached into my clutch and pulled out the small black remote control for the venue's audio-visual system. I had synced it 10 minutes ago. Dante's eyes widened. He recognized the look on my face. It was the same look I had when we were kids, and he broke my bike and I told him I would burn his treehouse down. He lunged for the remote. No, he shouted, but he was too late. My thumb pressed the play button. The massive LED screen behind us flickered. The view count disappeared. The logo for Beast Mode Energy vanished. The room went dark for a heartbeat, and then the screen exploded with light. But it wasn't a promotional video. It was a grainy vertical video shot from a cell phone. And the first sound that filled the silent ballroom was the sound of a woman screaming in terror as ice water hit her face. I stepped back, leaving Dante alone in the center of the stage, standing in front of his own crime. The show had officially begun. I stood there on the stage, the small black remote warm in my hand. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation, the crowd still smiling, still clapping, expecting a heartwarming tribute to a loving son. Dante stood next to me, his chest puffed out, ready to soak in the adoration. He had no idea that the button I had just pressed was the detonator to his entire life. The massive LED screen behind us, which had been displaying the flashing, aggressive logo of Beast Mode Energy, suddenly went black. The music cut out instantly. A low, confused murmur rippled through the audience. Dante glanced back at the screen, a flicker of annoyance crossing his face. He tapped his microphone. "Technical difficulties, folks," he joked, his voice booming with forced casualness. "It seems my sister's gift is so powerful it blew a fuse." He laughed, and a few sycophants in the front row laughed with him. But the laughter died in their throats as the screen flickered back to life. It was not a polished montage of family photos set to sentimental piano music. It was a stark vertical video, shaky and raw. A loading bar spun for a second, and then the image stabilized. The quality was crystal clear. It was shot from a first-person perspective, the camera held in someone's hand. My brother's hand. The setting was unmistakable. It was the living room of our childhood home, but it looked different. The furniture was pushed against the walls. The lighting was harsh. And in the center of the frame stood my mother. She was wearing a thin, stained nightgown. She looked confused, her hands trembling as she tried to balance on her walker. "Dance, Mom!" a voice shouted from behind the camera. It was Dante's voice. Loud, cruel, impatient. My mother looked at the camera, her eyes filled with fear. "I am tired, son," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the speakers. "Please let me sit down." "I said dance," Dante yelled. Then came the sound that silenced the room forever. It was a sharp, sickening crack. On the big screen, a hand entered the frame and slapped my mother across the face. The force of the blow sent her stumbling backward. She cried out a small broken sound and collapsed onto the hardwood floor. The ballroom gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. A woman in the front row covered her mouth with both hands. On the screen, the camera did not cut away. It moved closer. Dante hovered over her, zooming in on the red mark forming on her cheek. "Crying does not get likes," Dante sneered in the video. "Smile, old woman. Smile for the camera and show them how happy you are that I am taking care of you." My mother looked up, tears streaming down her face, and tried to force a smile. It was the most heartbreaking thing I had ever seen, a smile born of pure terror. I looked at the real Dante standing next to me. He was frozen, His face had gone ashen, the color draining away until he looked like a corpse. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He turned to look at the tech booth at the back of the room, frantically slashing his hand across his throat, the universal signal to cut the feed. I looked back at the booth. The technician, a young guy named Marcus, whom I had quietly emailed a secure override code 10 minutes ago, looked at Dante. He shrugged helplessly and held up his hands. The system was locked. I owned it. The video on the screen shifted. It was a montage, now a highlight reel of horror. The scene changed to the kitchen. Jessica walked into the frame. She was wearing her pharmacist's coat, looking professional and deadly. She was holding a syringe in one hand and a glass of wine in the other. My mother was sitting at the table, her head lolling forward. "She is still awake," Dante complained from behind the camera. "She is ruining the vibe. Just inject her," Jessica said, her voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "I am tired of listening to her whine. Give her the cocktail. It will knock her out for 12 hours. "Is it safe?" Dante asked, laughing. "Who cares?" Jessica replied, taking a sip of wine. "If she stops breathing, we call it a tragedy and cash the check. Just hold her arm down." The video showed Jessica plunging the needle into my mother's thin arm. My mother flinched, but she was too weak to fight. Her eyes rolled back in her head and she slumped forward onto the table. Dante zoomed in on her unconscious face. "Nighty-night, Mama," he whispered. The video ended. The screen went black for a second, then huge blood-red letters appeared, burning into the retinas of every person in the room. Dante Bennett, abuser, fraud, monster. The silence in the grand starlight ballroom was heavy, oppressive. It was the silence of 1,000 people realizing they had been applauding a devil. I stood perfectly still watching Dante. He looked like a cornered animal. He looked out at the audience, his eyes darting from face to face, looking for an ally, looking for anyone who would still believe him. But the spell was broken. The charismatic influencer was gone. All that remained was a small, scared man in a suit that suddenly looked too big for him. He turned to me. His eyes were wild. "You," he hissed, lunging toward me. "You ruined everything." But before he could reach me, a glass shattered. Then another. The crowd had woken up. A man in the second row, a major investor who had pledged $50,000 to the company just an hour ago, stood up and threw his champagne glass at the stage. It smashed at Dante's feet, shards of crystal exploding everywhere. "Liar," the man screamed. "Coward," a woman shouted from the back. The dam broke. The adoration turned to hatred in a heartbeat. People began to boo. Some were filming with their phones, live-streaming the downfall, just as Dante had live-streamed the abuse. The view count on the internet, which I could see on my phone, had not dropped. It had skyrocketed. 2 million people, 3 million. The whole world was watching him now, but they weren't liking and subscribing. They were witnessing his destruction. Dante backed away, tripping over a monitor speaker. He fell hard, scrambling backward on his hands and knees like a crab. Jessica tried to run. She kicked off her heels and made a dash for the side exit. But the security guards, the men Dante had hired to keep the riffraff out, stepped in front of the door. They crossed their huge arms, blocking her path. They had mothers, too. They had seen the video. They weren't going to let her leave. I walked to the center of the stage again. I picked up the microphone that Dante had dropped. My voice was calm, cold, and final. "You wanted to be famous, Dante," I said, looking down at him as he cowered on the floor. "You wanted everyone to know your name. Well, congratulations. Now they do." I pointed to the screen where the words Ki Bao Han, abuser, were still glowing. "That is your legacy now," I said. "Not the energy drink, not the money. That is who you are. And there is no delete button for this." Dante looked up at me, tears of self-pity streaming down his face. "Why," he sobbed. "Why did you do this to me? We are family." I looked at him, feeling absolutely nothing. The brother I had loved died a long time ago. "Family protects," I said. "Family does not poison." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder and closer. The flashing blue lights reflected off the high windows of the ballroom. The police were coming. And this time, they weren't coming to take a report. They were coming to take out the trash. I dropped the microphone. It hit the floor with a heavy thud that echoed through the room. I turned my back on him and walked toward the stairs. I did not look back. I did not need to. The sound of the crowd turning on him, the shouts of anger and the wail of the sirens were the only applause I needed. The screen of truth had done its work. The nightmare was over. Justice had arrived. The massive LED screen behind me was still burning with the red letters of my brother's destruction, but the real fire was spreading online. I glanced at the monitor on the edge of the stage. The view count was not stopping. It had surged past 2 million and was climbing toward 3. The chat room, which had been filled with heart emojis and praise just 10 minutes ago, was now a blur of rage. It was scrolling so fast it was almost impossible to read, but the words jumping out were visceral. Monster. Demon. Call the cops. I hope he rots. Dante thought he had built a fan base, but what he had actually built was a lynch mob, and I had just lit the torches. Dante was still on his knees staring at the screen in disbelief. He reached into his pocket, fumbling for his phone, desperate to cut the feed. He tapped the screen frantically, his sweat dripping onto the glass. But nothing happened. I saw the panic rise in his eyes as he realized the truth. The end stream button was grayed out. I had hard-coded a lock into the broadcasting software. He was trapped in a digital cage of his own making, forced to broadcast his humiliation until the battery died or the police arrived. He looked up at me, his face twisting from fear into a snarl of pure hatred. "You think this is funny?" he screamed, his voice cracking. "You think you can just ruin my life because you are jealous? Turn it off. Turn it off right now, or I swear to God I will kill you." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply raised the remote control again. "You want me to turn it off?" I asked, my voice amplified by the speakers, calm and deadly. "But we haven't even gotten to the best part yet. The video was just the visual. Now let's listen to the audio." I pressed the next button. The speakers, which had been silent for a moment, crackled to life. It was a recording I had pulled from Jessica's cloud backup, a voice memo she had sent to Dante just 3 days ago. Her voice filled the ballroom, clear, sharp, and undeniable. The recording began. "Babe, did you talk to the insurance agent yet?" I looked at the policy again. "If the old hag dies before the 1st of the month, the payout is double because of the accidental death clause. We need to speed this up." "I increased her heart medication dose this morning. It should cause an arrhythmia within 48 hours. Just make sure you are not in the room when she codes. We need to look surprised." The gasp from the audience was different this time. It wasn't shock. It was horror. Pure, unadulterated horror. They weren't just listening to a greedy couple. They were listening to a conspiracy to commit murder. Dante let out a roar. It was a primal, animalistic sound. He scrambled to his feet, his eyes bloodshot veins bulging in his neck. He forgot about the cameras. He forgot about the audience. All he saw was me, the sister who had just exposed his soul to the world. He charged. He moved fast, fueled by adrenaline and rage. He lowered his shoulder, aiming to tackle me, to knock the microphone from my hand, to silence the truth physically, since he couldn't do it digitally. But he had forgotten who I was. He remembered the little sister who used to cry when he hid her dolls. He did not know the woman who had spent the last 3 years living in Rio de Janeiro, training in Muay Thai 3 nights a week to blow off steam after hunting cyber criminals. I waited until he was 2 feet away. I didn't retreat. I pivoted. I shifted my weight to my left leg and unleashed a roundhouse kick that carried all the anger of the last 2 weeks. My heel connected squarely with his chest. The impact sounded like a gunshot. Dante flew backward. He lifted off his feet, airborne for a split second before crashing down onto the hardwood stage. He slid 5 feet, knocking over a monitor speaker, and came to a stop in a heap of tangled limbs and expensive suit fabric. He wheezed, gasping for air, clutching his ribs. I stood over him barely out of breath. The red silk of my dress settled around me. I looked like a warrior queen standing over a fallen usurper. The audience erupted. It wasn't polite applause, it was a roar of approval. They were cheering for the takedown. I walked over to where he lay groaning. I looked down at the camera lens that was still broadcasting his defeat to the world. I leaned in close, making sure my face filled the frame. Did you see that I asked the millions of people watching? Did you see how easy it is to knock down a bully? This man told you he was a hero. He told you he was a saint. But look at him. He is just a coward who hits women and poisons his own mother for a check. I turned back to Dante. He was trying to crawl away, dragging himself toward the edge of the stage. "Where are you going, Dante?" I asked, following him. "The party is just getting started. You wanted to be famous. Stay and enjoy the spotlight." Suddenly, a commotion erupted near the side exit. I looked over. Jessica was screaming. The security guards, the massive men in black suits who were supposed to protect the VIPs, were holding her by the arms. She was kicking and spitting, her mascara running down her face in black streaks. "Let me go!" she shrieked. "I didn't do anything. It was all him. He made me do it." One of the guards looked at me and nodded. They had heard the recording. They knew she was the one with the syringe. They weren't holding her for Dante. They were holding her for the police. And then the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom burst open. The blue lights from outside flooded the room, cutting through the gold and crystal decor. A team of officers swarmed in, guns drawn. But these weren't just local cops. In the lead were agents wearing windbreakers with 3 yellow letters on the back. FBI. Dante stopped crawling. He looked at the agents, then he looked at me. The realization hit him. This wasn't just about abuse anymore. The wire fraud, the internet crimes, the crossing of state lines to commit insurance fraud. I hadn't just called the police. I had called the feds. I stepped back to the microphone one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice ringing out with a finality that signaled the end of the show. "Thank you for coming to the launch of Beast Mode. I think we can all agree that the brand is officially dead. Please drive home safely, and remember, call your mothers. Tell them you love them. Because you never know what kind of monster might be living in your guest room." I dropped the microphone. It clattered on the floor, the feedback screeching for a second before cutting out. I walked to the edge of the stage and sat down, my legs dangling over the side. I watched as the FBI agents swarmed the stage. They hauled Dante up, cuffing his hands behind his back. He didn't fight. He was broken. As they dragged him past me, he looked at me one last time. There was no anger left in his eyes, only terror. I didn't say anything. I just pointed to the phone that was still streaming. The camera caught the perfect shot of him in handcuffs, head bowed, being led away to spend the rest of his life in a cage. I looked at the screen of my own phone. The comments were still scrolling. "Justice served. Queen. Finally." I took a deep breath. The adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the feeling of a job finished. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and walked down the stairs. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. No one spoke to me. They stared with a mixture of awe and fear. Even Aunt May and Uncle Ben huddled in the corner, refusing to make eye contact. They knew they were next. They knew I had the receipts. But that was a battle for tomorrow. Tonight I was going to the hospital. I was going to sit by my mother's bed. And when she woke up, I was going to tell her that the monsters were gone and they were never coming back. The applause that had filled the grand Starlight Ballroom only minutes ago had completely disintegrated, replaced by a chaotic symphony of outrage and panic. It was a beautiful, terrifying implosion. I stood on the edge of the stage, watching the empire my brother built on lies crumble in real time. The investors, men in expensive suits who had been practically drooling over Dante's projections an hour ago, were now scrambling for the exits. I saw the venture capitalist who had thrown his glass pulling out his phone, likely screaming at his PR team to scrub any mention of beast mode energy from their portfolio. They were fleeing a sinking ship, desperate not to be dragged down by the undertow of a scandal that was currently trending #1 worldwide. But the most satisfying sight was the family. My extended relatives, the aunts and uncles who had turned their backs on me at the barbecue, were now trying to make themselves invisible. Aunt May was holding her sequined purse over her face like a shield, trying to push through the crowd without being recognized. Uncle Ben had reversed his electric wheelchair into a dark corner, his head bowed, terrified that the cameras might swing in his direction. They knew that the internet never forgets. They knew that by tomorrow morning they would not be the proud relatives of a mogul, but the complicit enablers of a monster. They had feasted on the scraps of my mother's suffering, and now they were choking on them. In the midst of this pandemonium, I spotted movement near the service entrance. It was Jessica. She had abandoned her husband the moment the first glass shattered. She had kicked off her designer heels and was sprinting barefoot across the polished floor, clutching her purse to her chest. Inside that bag, I knew were the forged insurance papers. She was trying to slip out the back to disappear into the night and perhaps catch a flight before the law caught up with her. She looked like a rat scuttling from a burning building, selfish and desperate. She reached the double doors of the service exit and pushed them open, expecting freedom. Instead, she ran straight into a wall, but it was not a wall of brick or concrete, it was a wall of justice. Standing in the hallway, blocking the exit shoulder to shoulder, were 12 women. They were not police officers, they were not security guards. They were the church mothers. The deaconesses and elders of the neighborhood congregation my mother had attended for 30 years. Leading them was Mrs. Higgins, my mother's next-door neighbor, the woman who had slipped me the address of the nursing home. They were dressed in their Sunday best, their hats tall and imposing, their arms crossed over their chests. They had been watching the live stream. They had seen the abuse, and they had driven down here not to pray, but to ensure that the devil did not escape. Jessica skidded to a halt, gasping. "Move!" she shrieked, trying to shove past them. "Get out of my way, you old hags!" Mrs. Higgins did not budge. She looked down at Jessica with a gaze that could strip paint off a wall. She stepped forward, her presence filling the hallway. "Going somewhere, dutiful daughter-in-law?" Mrs. Higgins asked, her voice calm, but laced with steel. "We saw the video, Jessica. We heard you laughing while you fed Lucille dog food. You think you are going to just walk away from that?" "I didn't do it," Jessica stammered, backing up, looking for another way out. "It was Dante. I was afraid of him. I am a victim too." Mrs. Higgins didn't waste words. She raised her hand and delivered a slap that echoed louder than the sirens approaching outside. It was a sharp, disciplined strike, the kind a mother gives a child who has crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. Jessica cried out, falling back onto the floor, clutching her cheek. She looked up, stunned that these women, usually so gentle, had turned into soldiers. "You are not a victim," Mrs. Higgins said, towering over her. "You are a pharmacist. You took an oath to heal, and you used it to poison. You are staying right here until the police come to collect you." Jessica tried to scramble up, but the other women stepped forward, forming an impenetrable circle around her. They began to sing. It was a low, humming hymn, a song of sorrow and judgment. Jessica curled into a ball on the floor, sobbing, trapped by the very community she had mocked. Then the main doors of the ballroom blew open. The sound was different this time. It was not the chaotic noise of a crowd. It was the precise, heavy thud of authority. The blue and red lights from the street flooded the room, blindingly bright. But the uniforms that poured in were not the beige and brown of the local sheriff's department. These men and women wore navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters emblazoned on the back. FBI. The local police had failed me because they looked at jurisdiction and paperwork. But the FBI does not care about local politics. I had given them evidence of wire fraud, which is a federal crime. I had given them evidence of insurance fraud involving interstate commerce. I had handed them a federal case wrapped in a bow, and they had arrived in force. Free's voice bellowed over a megaphone. "Federal agents! Nobody move!" The room froze. Even the fleeing investors stopped in their tracks, hands raised. A team of 6 agents moved in a tactical formation straight toward the stage. They moved with a terrifying efficiency. They did not look at the guests. They did not look at me. Their eyes were locked on one target. Dante was still on the floor where I had kicked him. He looked up dazed and saw the federal agents swarming the stage. For the first time in his life, the arrogance was completely gone. He tried to stand to run to do something, but 2 agents were on him instantly. They slammed him back down onto the hardwood, pulling his arms behind his back with force. The click of the handcuffs was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Another team secured Jessica near the exit, pulling her up from the floor and cuffing her hands behind her back. She was wailing now, a high-pitched sound of pure terror. The lead agent, a tall man with a grim face, stepped onto the stage. He looked down at Dante, then pulled a folded document from his vest. He didn't whisper. He read it loud enough for the press, the guests, and the millions watching online to hear. Dante Bennett and Jessica Bennett, the agent, announced, his voice booming. "You are under arrest. The United States Attorney's Office is charging you with 18 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of aggravated elder abuse, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder for the purpose of insurance fraud." The words hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Conspiracy to commit murder. That was the end. That was life in prison. That was no bail. Dante struggled against the agents, thrashing like a caught fish. He lifted his head, scanning the room wildly, until his eyes locked on me. I was still standing there, watching him with cold detachment. "This is your fault," he screamed, his voice raw and broken. "You did this, Jazz. You set me up. You jealous witch. I am the star. I am the victim here. You gai bei toi." He switched to Vietnamese in his desperation, a language we hadn't spoken since we were children, reverting to the tongue of our ancestors, to curse me. I looked at him, feeling a profound sense of pity. He still didn't get it. He still thought he was the center of the universe. "I didn't set you up, Dante," I said quietly, though he was too far away to hear me. "I just turned on the lights." The agents hauled him up. They dragged him across the stage, past the shattered champagne glasses, past the ruined banner of his company. The cameras flashed blindingly, capturing his perp walk. The live stream was still running, documenting his final walk of shame. I watched them drag Jessica out the side door, past the stern faces of the church mothers, who nodded at the agents approvingly. The ballroom began to empty, leaving behind the debris of a destroyed legacy. I stood alone on the stage, the adrenaline finally starting to drain away, leaving my knees weak. It was over. The dragon was slain. But as I looked at the empty space where my brother had stood, I realized that the hardest part was yet to come. I had won the war, but now I had to heal the casualty. I had to go find my mother. The wheels of justice usually turn slowly, but when you grease them with terabytes of high-definition evidence, the gears spin fast enough to crush bone. It took exactly 30 days for the state of Georgia to prepare its case against Dante and Jessica Bennett. The trial was not the media circus my brother had always dreamed of starring in. It was a surgical dismantling of 2 human lives. The courtroom was packed every single day. The public gallery was filled with the same people who had watched the live stream, the former fans who now wanted to see the monster in chains. I sat in the front row every day wearing black, looking at the back of Dante's head. He never turned around. He sat slumped in his chair, looking smaller and smaller as the prosecutor played the videos again and again. When the sentencing day arrived, the air in the courtroom was so heavy it felt hard to breathe. The judge was a stern woman with gray hair and zero patience for cruelty. She asked Dante if he had anything to say. He stood up trembling and tried to blame his childhood. He tried to blame the pressure of social media. He even tried to blame me. The judge cut him off with a bang of her gavel that echoed like a gunshot. She looked him in the eye and told him that in her 20 years on the bench, she had never seen such a calculated betrayal of a vulnerable person. She sentenced Dante Bennett to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. 25 years. He would be an old man when he saw the sky without bars. He collapsed onto the table, sobbing into his hands, but nobody moved to comfort him. Then it was Jessica's turn. The woman who had sworn an oath to do no harm stood there in a gray jumpsuit, stripped of her designer clothes and her arrogance. The judge was even harsher with her. She called Jessica a disgrace to the medical profession. She sentenced her to 15 years and revoked her pharmacy license permanently. She would never dispense a pill or wear a white coat again. As the bailiffs led them away, the sound of the chains rattling around their waists was the only music I needed to hear. 3 days later, I went to the federal detention center to see my brother one last time. I did not go to forgive him. I went to make sure he understood exactly why his life was over. The visiting room was cold and smelled of industrial bleach and hopelessness. I sat on a metal stool on one side of a thick plexiglass window. When the guard brought Dante in, I almost didn't recognize him. The handsome influencer face was gone. His left eye was swollen shut, turning a sickly shade of purple and yellow. His nose was broken crooked and bandaged with white tape. His lip was split. He walked with a limp. He sat down and picked up the phone receiver with shaking hands. I picked up mine. "Jazz," he whispered, his voice thick and wet. "You have to get me out of here. You have to call a lawyer. They know who I am in here. They saw the video. The other inmates, they hate people who hurt their mothers. They beat me in the shower. I can't survive 25 years of this. Please, I am your brother." I looked at him through the scratched glass. I looked at the bruises and the fear in his remaining good eye. I remembered my mother's face when he slapped her. I remembered her fear. "You are right, Dante," I said, keeping my voice steady and cold. "They know who you are. You wanted to be famous. You wanted everyone to know your name. Well, congratulations. You are the most famous person in this prison. But they are going to kill me." He sobbed, tears leaking from his swollen eye. I leaned forward, pressing my hand against the glass. "No, they won't. They will just make sure you never forget what you did. You used our mother for content. Now you are the content. Enjoy the spotlight, brother." I hung up the phone. He started screaming, slamming his fist against the glass, begging me to come back. I stood up and walked away. I did not look back. I left him there in the hell he had built for himself. The final act of cleanup happened at the house. I had returned to Cascade Heights to oversee the liquidation of the estate. The house where the horrors had happened was going on the market. I was packing the last of my mother's personal items when the doorbell rang. I checked the camera. It was the vultures. Aunt May and Uncle Ben were standing on the porch. Aunt May was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. Uncle Ben was in his old manual wheelchair, looking humble and pathetic. They had brought cousin Kiki too, who was holding a bouquet of cheap gas station flowers. I opened the door, but I did not invite them in. I stood in the doorway, blocking their entry. "Jasmine, honey," Aunt May said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "We heard about the sentencing. Such a tragedy for the family. We just wanted to come by and check on you. We know you are all alone now and family needs to stick together." I stared at them. I stared at the people who had eaten my mother's food while she was being starved. "We were thinking," Uncle Ben chimed in, looking down at his hands. "Since Dante is gone and you are going back to Brazil, someone needs to look after the properties. We could help you manage the estate. You know, keep it in the family. And maybe if there is a little money left over from the sale, we could use some help with bills." We were victims of Dante too. He tricked us. The audacity was breathtaking. They honestly thought that because Dante was gone, I would revert to being the quiet pushover niece. They thought the Bank of Bennett was open for business again. I reached into the box by the door. I pulled out a stack of thick envelopes. I did not hand them cash. I handed each of them a heavy cream-colored envelope. "Here," I said. "This is for you." Aunt May's eyes lit up. She probably thought it was a check. She ripped it open greedily. Uncle Ben tore his open with his teeth. They pulled out the documents. Their faces dropped. It wasn't money. It was a legal decree. "What is this?" Aunt May asked, her voice trembling. "It is a permanent restraining order," I said, my voice hard as flint. "It forbids you from contacting me or my mother ever again. It forbids you from coming within 500 feet of any property we own. If you violate it, I will have you arrested just like I had Dante arrested." "But we are family," Kiki cried. "No," I said, stepping back and grabbing the door handle. "You are parasites, and I just called the exterminator. My mother has no family in Atlanta anymore. She only has me. Get off my porch, get off my land, and never say my name again." I slammed the door in their faces. I heard them shouting. I heard Aunt May crying about how cruel I was, but the sound was muffled and distant. I locked the deadbolt. It was the most satisfying sound in the world. Over the next week, I moved with ruthless efficiency. I sold the house to a developer who planned to tear it down and build something new. I liked that idea. The walls that had witnessed my mother's torture needed to be turned to dust. I sold Dante's Range Rover. I sold the furniture. I liquidated every single asset that tied us to this city. By the time I was done, the Bennett legacy in Atlanta was nothing but a bank transfer code and a bad memory. I packed one suitcase, I took the photo albums I had saved, I took my mother's Bible, and I ordered a private medical transport jet. It was time to go home. Not to the house of horrors, but to the sanctuary I had built by the sea. The war was over, and the good guys had won. The sun over Rio de Janeiro does not just shine, it embraces you. It wraps around your skin like a warm blanket, melting away the cold, gray memories of Atlanta. I stood on the terrace of my villa, looking out at the expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. The water was a brilliant, sparkling turquoise crashing rhythmically against the white sand below. It was a sound that demanded peace. It was a sound that drowned out the phantom echoes of gavels banging and cell doors slamming that still sometimes haunted my dreams. But those nightmares were becoming less frequent. Here in the sanctuary I had built, there was no room for ghosts. I walked across the stone patio, my bare feet enjoying the warmth of the tiles. In the shade of a large umbrella, sitting in a cushioned wheelchair that cost more than my brother's car, was my mother. Lucille Bennett looked nothing like the skeletal, terrified woman I had found in that nursing home a month ago. Her cheeks were full and flushed with a healthy pink glow. Her hair, which Jessica had let become matted and gray, was now dyed a rich cocoa color and braided elegantly. She was wearing a loose floral dress that caught the ocean breeze, and she was sipping fresh coconut water through a bamboo straw. I sat down in the wicker chair beside her. She turned to me and smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached her eyes. The fear that used to live in her gaze was gone, replaced by a gentle, foggy contentment. The doctors called it dissociative amnesia. They said her brain, in an act of supreme mercy, had walled off the memories of the trauma. She knew Dante was gone, but she didn't remember the waterboarding. She didn't remember the dog food. She just knew that he was away on a very long trip and that he couldn't come back. In her mind, I was the one who had come to take her on a permanent vacation. It was a lie, perhaps, but it was a kind lie. And after everything she had endured, she deserved the kindness of forgetting. "The view is beautiful today, Jasmine," she said, her voice strong and clear. "The water looks like diamonds." "It does, Mama," I replied, reaching out to take her hand. Her skin was soft again. The bruises were long gone, faded into bad memories that only I carried now. "Are you comfortable? Do you need anything?" "I have everything I need right here," she said, squeezing my fingers. "I am just glad you came home, baby. I missed you." I squeezed back, fighting the lump in my throat. "I am never leaving again, Mama. I promise." My phone vibrated on the glass table next to me. For a moment, my pulse spiked, a reflex from the days when every notification meant a new battle. But I forced myself to breathe. I picked it up. It was an email notification from my bank in Switzerland. The subject line read simply, "Wire transfer received." I opened it. The amount was staggering. It was the payout from the deal I had signed last week. A major streaming service, the one with the red N, had bought the exclusive rights to our story. They wanted to make a docuseries about the influencer who live-streamed his own crime. The world was still obsessed with Dante Bennett. Even in prison he was generating content. I looked at the number. 7 figures. It was enough money to buy 3 more villas. It was enough to retire twice over. But as I looked at it, I felt nothing but disgust. This was blood money. It was profit generated from my mother's pain. I could not spend a dime of it. If I bought a dress or a car with this money, it would feel like I was no better than Dante. I opened my banking app. I had already set up the transfer. I typed in the account number for the National Center on Elder Abuse. I typed in the full amount. I didn't keep a single cent for administration fees. I didn't keep a finder's fee. I hit transfer. The screen loaded for a second, and then a green checkmark appeared. Transaction complete. Just like that, the money was gone. It would go to hire lawyers for other grandmothers trapped in nursing homes. It would go to buy hidden cameras for suspicious daughters. It would do good in a world that desperately needed it. And I still had my own money, the money I earned with my own skills to take care of us. That was enough. I set the phone down. I felt lighter. The last tether to the sordid, ugly drama was cut. I need to stretch my legs, Mama, I said, standing up. I'm going to walk down to the water. I will be right back. Take your time, baby, she said, turning her face back to the sun. I walked down the winding stone staircase that led to the private beach. The sand was hot and powdery between my toes. The roar of the ocean grew louder, filling my ears, washing away the silence. I walked until the foam of the waves licked at my ankles. The water was cool, a shocking contrast to the heat of the day. I reached into the pocket of my sundress and pulled out an object I had been carrying around for weeks. It was an old smartphone. The screen was cracked. The casing was scratched. It was the phone I had found in my mother's bag at the nursing home. It was also the phone that held the original master files of the videos. It was the smoking gun. Technically, the FBI had copies. The court had copies. The internet had millions of copies. But this physical device felt like an anchor. It was the eye that had recorded the evil. It felt heavy in my hand, dense with the negative energy of everything it had witnessed. I looked at it one last time. I thought about Dante sitting in a 6x8 cell right now. I wondered if he was thinking about me. I wondered if he was thinking about the likes and shares he used to crave. He had traded his freedom for attention, and now he had all the time in the world to think about the bad deal he had made. I looked at Jessica, probably scrubbing floors in a federal penitentiary, her soft pharmacist hands blistering from the hard labor. They were rotting. They were withering away in the dark. And here I was, standing in the sun, breathing air that tasted of salt and freedom. I pulled my arm back. I threw the phone as hard as I could. It spun through the air, a black speck against the blue sky. It caught the light for a brief second before it splashed into the waves 50 yards out. I watched the ripples disappear, instantly swallowed by the power of the ocean. The current would take it. The salt would corrode the circuits. The sand would bury it. It was gone. A profound sense of release washed over me. My shoulders dropped. The tension that I had been carrying in my jaw for months finally released. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, sweet air. I turned around and looked back up at the cliff. I could see the balcony of the villa. I could see the colorful umbrella. And I could see my mother safe, happy, and loved. People say you cannot choose your family. They say blood is thicker than water. They are wrong. Blood is just biology. It is just a sequence of DNA. It does not grant you loyalty. It does not guarantee love. And it certainly does not give anyone the permission to hurt you. I learned the hard way that family is not a noun. It is a verb. Family is what you do. Family is showing up. Family is protecting. And sometimes family is the people you choose to build a life with after you have burned the bridge to the people who tried to destroy you. I began to walk back up the stairs towards the music of a samba playing softly from the terrace. I was Jasmine Bennett. I was a daughter. I was a survivor. And as the sun set over Rio, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I realized the ultimate truth. The best revenge is not prison sentences. It is not public humiliation. Those are just consequences. The true, sweet, everlasting revenge is to be happy. It is to live a life so full of joy and peace that the people who tried to break you become nothing more than a footnote in your biography. My brother was in a cage, I was in paradise, and that was the only ending this story ever needed. This story serves as a brutal reminder that shared DNA is not a license for abuse. Family is defined by loyalty and protection, not just biology. Dante chased fame by exploiting the vulnerable, only to find that the truth is an unstoppable force. The greatest lesson is that silence protects the oppressor, but action liberates the oppressed. We must be the guardians for those who cannot fight for themselves. True peace comes when we have the courage to cut toxic ties, no matter how close the relation, and build a sanctuary with those who truly love us. If you believe that family is defined by love and not blood, hit that like button and subscribe. Share this story with someone who needs the strength to walk away from toxicity and build their own peace.